Jobs in America. Thursday's jobs report showing a record 4.8 million jobs were added in June, with the unemployment rate dropping to 11.1%, more than 2 percentage point dip from May. However, with many still unemployed and coronavirus cases spiking in certain parts of the country, Americans, some of them, are hoping for additional stimulus. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has indicated that he would like to pass legislation before the August recess, but will not extend the $600 per week unemployment boost. Joining me now, U.S. Labor Secretary Eugene Scalia. Mr. Secretary, great to see you. Do you think that additional stimulus, and we'll get into the specifics of that, do you think additional money some way, somehow, is necessary right now?
Well, the jobs report Friday, Dagan, was just such extraordinarily good news. And as you're indicating, I think will be part of the discussion about what we should do in any legislation at the end of July. We have now added 7.5 million jobs over the months of May and June, far better than people were projecting in March at the time that CARES Act was enacted, at the time that $600 a week unemployment benefit was put in place. So unemployment dropping to just about 11%. You know, I was on with Maria not too long ago. She was asking whether we could get to 10% unemployment by the end of the year, and here we are at 11% for June. So things are trending so much better than people had been predicting, and I think that's going to influence the debate now about further stimulus.
Will that reverse, though, even in a small way, given the fact that the unemployment and employment report, those surveys are taken in the middle of the month, and now you have some problems in states with cases spiking, that reopenings pull back somewhat? Here in New York City, for example, the nail salons will be able to reopen today, but indoor dining is still off limits. So are you concerned about these numbers even a little bit heading in the other direction, heading the wrong direction?
Well, obviously, we're watching the increase in cases, and that's something that we need to be attentive to and careful about. And that's why we're reminding people that the virus is still there. Social distancing remains important. Masks, in many circumstances, are needed. And we need to get those numbers back down. And we do see some locales and states pausing. On the other hand, I look at healthcare, for example. We lost about more than 1.5 million jobs in healthcare. We've put a lot back now. I think we put about 360,000 healthcare jobs back in June, but we still have 900,000 fewer people employed in that sector than we did in February. We can put those people back in the next couple of months, I think. Local government numbers are down there, too. We can put people back there. So I think there's a lot of room to put people back to work, even as we do pause certain types of reopenings like restaurants. I think most workplaces are safe. We know the steps to take, and I'm seeing them taken in workplaces across the country.
Are they? Because, again, I was in a well-known grocery store chain over the weekend in a rural part of the country, not in one of the hot spots, but I went in, there's a sign on the door that says everybody has to wear a mask, and I'd say at least more than half the people who were shopping were not only not wearing masks, but they were talking on phones. And to what extent is it on the burden of the business owner to enforce these recommendations? I know they're not laws, but certainly they're recommendations. All the employees were wearing masks, but the customers weren't.
Well, the employers that I speak to and workplaces I visit, I've never seen U.S. businesses as focused on health and safety as they are right now, for obvious reasons. And we at the Labor Department have put out a great deal of guidance with the CDC and OSHA on steps to keep workplaces safe. There are, of course, going to be some businesses that don't take the steps they need. When we get those complaints, we are looking into them. And I think if you've got locales where people are getting too casual about masks, that it makes sense for local officials to take a look at what's going on, particularly if there is community spread. The rise in cases we're seeing in some of the states you mentioned, Dagan, I think it's a message to the rest of the country. We do have to be careful. We do have to be disciplined. We can reopen safely, but it does get harder if people just throw all caution to the wind. We can't do that.
Gene, Mr. Secretary, talk about the stimulus, though. In terms of what the administration would support, is extending that $600 per week in extra unemployment, is that off the table?
Well, the $600 a week, Dagan, which was part of the CARES Act, was a really important thing to do as we closed the economy. We were looking at a circumstance where, as an often necessary public health measure, the government was basically saying, you can't work. And so in that really unusual, I think 4 out of 5 people currently on unemployment would get more from unemployment if we continued that $600 benefit going into the rest of the year. And so I do not think that that kind of a benefit makes sense. When in the Great Recession, 8-10 years ago, the added federal unemployment amount was just $25 a week compared to $600. In most states, you can make between $50,000 and $55,000 a year annualized with this $600 a week benefit. In some states, it's about $65,000 annualized on unemployment. I think that's not going to work well over a long term.
I want to talk about a potential monument to your father, but before we move on, is it possible, or rather, is it nearly impossible for the state unemployment offices to get more granular on how much people get in unemployment benefits, say, to adjust it per individual? Say, if you make this much, then your unemployment benefits can't exceed what you earn in your regular job. We were talking about this earlier with Congressman Reed and Ryan. Is that something impossible for the state employment offices to do?
We continue to look at that question, Dagan. The states do take account of prior income to some extent in setting the state unemployment amount. Remember when we talk about the fact that the $600 benefit is expiring, there is, of course, the state payment that continues after that. So we are looking at their ability to adjust it. But you're right, there are some limitations to those state computers, which is part of the reasons we've seen some of the delays we've seen, too.
So President Trump announced this weekend an executive order to establish a national garden with monuments of prominent figures in American history, including your father, the late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. What does his inclusion mean for you and the whole family?
It's very touching, a great honor. It did come as a surprise when we heard the president had that in mind. I think that it's so important that we do admire the great Americans who founded this country. I was watching the Hamilton Broadway production with my little girls over the weekend. So many extraordinary people founded this country. That production shows you that. We need to honor those great Americans. I'm incredibly touched that the president would include my father on a list like that.
And people can go read your father's decisions because they're beautifully written and really insightful. So that's one of my personal favorite pastimes. Mr. Secretary, great to see you. Secretary Eugene Scalia, take care.